Hello everyone. In this video lecture, we're going to be taking a look at the first 85 lines of Beowulf. This lecture is to help you understand how to apply some of the techniques of analysis that we discussed in the previous video lecture. You're going to see me read through this portion of the text and begin to ask questions and make observations based on the ideas presented and the language of the text in order to determine subjects and themes, and also to make inferences regarding the characters and the situations and the values inherent in this work. As you listen to this video lecture, think not just about what I'm saying in terms of the arguments and the ideas that I'm presenting, but the process by which I arrive at those conclusions. Look not at the meaning that I derive, or not only at the meaning that I derive from the text, but the way in which I build the arguments or build my interpretations using examples as I read. What I'm presenting to you here, in essence, is the process of close reading as a model. In order to understand what's going on in this section of the text, we need to actually appreciate the overarching context. What we have in those first 85 lines is essentially a kind of mythohistory, the evolutionary history of the tribe that leads up to Hrothgar. So we have Shield Chieftain and his offspring, their exploits related to us in almost a genealogical fashion until we reach the main subject of this part of the work, Hrothgar, who builds a fantastic mead hall, which is like a center of revelry and community for the civilization that he's building, and attracts men to him because of his gift giving and because of his success at war and diplomacy. After this point, Grendel attacks Heorot, this monstrous creature from the marshes and fens beyond the civilized mead hall and the surrounding territory. Grendel enters into the scene and begins attacking the hall at night, spiriting away soldiers and men because he is unable to be harmed. No warrior can actually defeat him. He is impervious to all weapons, it seems. Eventually, later on in the work, long after these first 85 lines, a hero known as Beowulf enters into the scene, having heard of the plight of Hrothgar and his people, and determines to fight Grendel. He encounters and engages with a number of the people who live in Hrothgar's mead hall, and then he actually engages in the titanic struggle against the central monster in this piece, Grendel. So, the Speardanes in days gone by, and the kings who ruled them had courage and greatness. We have heard of those princes' heroic campaigns. So already from the outset here, I've identified a few central subjects, that there's something about war, conflict, heroism, glory, and courage. We get the sense that the culture that is going to be telling the story, as framed by those first three lines, is going to be concerned with an exploration of those concepts. So as we look through the rest of the story and begin to trace those already identified subjects, we can think, what is this story trying to say about glory, honor, heroism, leadership, kings, and the like? There was Shield Chieftain, scourge of many tribes, a wrecker of mead benches, rampaging among foes. This terror of the hall troops had come far. Now we have a kind of elaborate description in heroic terms, using extensive hyperbolic diction. He's the scourge of many tribes, the wrecker of mead benches. So he has earned glory and he has earned the right to rule. He is a great king because of the devastation he has wrought upon his enemies. Already the values of this culture, the glory that can be won through conflict, have been introduced to us. However, is that, as the central value of this text, going to continue to be privileged? We don't know. But we already see those pagan values of conquest and the destruction of enemies to be at the forefront. A foundling to start with, he would flourish later on as his powers waxed and his worth was proved. In the end, each clan on the outlying coasts beyond the Whale Road had to yield to him and began to pay tribute. That was one good king. Notice that he is a foundling. The very beginning of the line of Hrothgar and Heorot, the mead hall that Hrothgar constructs, starts with Shield Chieftain, a man who is not bound by blood to the tribe, but is welcomed into it. He's an orphan, a foundling who has just been discovered abandoned in the forest, and then taken in an act of kindness and largesse, an act of mercy and grace. So right from the outset, we see two kinds of values being presented to us as different. We have the scourging of enemies, and we have grace and mercy to the helpless and the innocent. From the very start, these two diametrically opposed elements of the culture are at the forefront. But he is a foundling. So, in some way, he can be welcomed into the community and recognized as a member of the community without actually being a member of it by birth. So, there's a process here of reconciling people together, of creating bonds of fraternity and brotherhood, of building society and welcoming people into that society without the necessity of being bonded by blood as in a tribe or a clan of people who all share the same birthright. He is welcomed into it and then proves himself worthy of being so. And he rises to be one of the greatest kings of the nation. Afterwards, a boy child was born to Shield. So we see this genealogical progression of all the people here. We're going generation by generation. This boy child was a cub in the yard. So he's like a bear. We can see that there's this promise of future strength that is just waiting to burst forth from him, a comfort sent by God to that nation. He knew what they'd told, the long times and troubles they'd come through without a leader. So the Lord of life, the glorious Almighty, made this man renowned. Now we're introduced to a new concept here. At the outset, we began with this idea of glory being won by the superlative individual, the person who can wrest it from the destruction of his enemies through the strength of his arm. Here, in this next stanza, in this next section of the text, we have something that's diametrically opposed to that. Because it's the glorious Almighty, that singular God, the Christian God, who made this man renowned, the Lord of life. Because he knew that the people would suffer without a strong leader, so he elected that leader through his providential grace. The glory that he won then was not his own, but God's ultimately, because he doled it out. He apportioned it to this man. The principles regarding glory already we see evolving in this text. The ideas about glory and how it works, how people earn it, have suddenly changed. Already we have several different themes that we can pull out based on what we learn from Shield or what we see in the values of that first section of the text, and then what we see here. Because he is sent by the Lord of life, the one who gives life to all and takes it away, the glorious Almighty, because he is meant to be a comfort to the people. Thus, leaders, it seems, are elected into their positions by God in order to rule justly and to protect their people. We have about 5 different themes right there about how leaders gain their power. It's ultimately a providential or organizational arrangement by God, that leaders have to execute their powers justly in order to be a comfort to their people. These are values inherent to the culture that we see in this moment, and they're also seemingly implications of what is being said. It doesn't tell us that that's what leaders should be, but the text privileges and values those things. Shield had fathered a famous son. Beowulf's name was known throughout the north, and the young prince must be prudent like that, giving freely where his father's lives, so that afterwards in age when fighting starts and steadfast companions will stand by him and hold the line. Behavior that's admired is the path to power among people everywhere. So, think about what we learn of this culture by way of these lines. A young prince must be prudent, using the strength of his youth and the treasures and riches that he gathers to win friends to his cause. Here we see the basis of civilization for this culture. It's in the acquisition of steadfast companions by giving freely. So, in the mutual exchange of gifts, in giving gifts to others, you earn their respect, you earn their devotion, and you win them to your cause. So this civilization, as with the War Guild, that death price that brings peace by paying somebody off, by paying restitution for injuring or killing one of their loved ones, so too here, in order to create a civilization, this culture is reliant on the mutual exchange of tokens of respect, of gifts, and if you can earn other people's respect, they will stand by you and allow you to form that community for mutual protection and defense against your enemies. Because, in the end, another theme, behavior that's admired is the path to power among people everywhere. Shield was still thriving when his time came, and he crossed over into the Lord's keeping, so he passed away, he died. His warrior band did what he bade them. When he laid down and the law among the Danes, they shouldered him out to the sea's flood, the chief they revered who had long ruled them. A ring horde proud rode into the harbor, ice-clad, outbound, a craft for a prince. So, again, as is typical with epic poems, we have this extensive, elaborate description in resplendent, ornate detail of the death ship that's going to carry the corpse of Shield Chieftain, laden with treasures that he has accumulated over his life, out into the ocean, out into the sea, as a testament to the man that he was, as a testament to everything that he was able to acquire. in his life, all the glory that's represented physically by the treasures he amassed in his life through his conquests. So again, we see the privileging of material possessions because not only are they the basis for civilization, you give gifts in order to win people to your cause and create a civilization. Now we see that these treasures are trophies of the glories and victories that a person has won that show that his life was worthwhile. However, even with all this elaborate and ornate detail, that's not going to hold true. Something is going to enter into this poem that upsets that dynamic. What we see here are pagan values at work. That the gods, the many gods, bless people and give them gifts and glory based on what they can wrest from the world, the successes in conflict that they can achieve. They stretched their beloved lord in his boat, laid out by the mast amidships, the great ring giver. So he's the great ring giver. He's known as being great because he gives out rings as tokens of his generosity and affection towards all of his subjects or to those that he's trying to win to his cause. Gift giving is again highlighted as the basis of his greatness. That's the behavior that's to be admired. Far-fetched treasures were piled up upon him and precious gear. I never heard before of a ship so well furbished, with battle tackle, bladed weapons, and coats of mail. The massed treasure was loaded atop of him. It would travel far on out in that ocean's sway. They decked his body no less bountifully, so they're piling treasure upon treasure, weapons, shields, bucklers, armor, gold inlaid and embossed artifacts, rings, as a testament to the man that he was. Because that honor that he's won is who he is. That is his identity to this culture. They decked his body with no less bountiful with offerings than those first ones did who cast him away when he was a child, and launched him alone out over the waves. And they set a gold standard up high above his head, and let him drift to wind and tide, bewailing him and mourning their loss. Look at how this passage ends, though. Remember that this is a poem about the conflict between pagan and Christian values. Look at what happens to all the glories that he has earned, as represented physically by the treasures he has amassed and that are carried with him into death. No man can tell, no wise man in hall or weathered veteran knows for certain who salvaged that load. What we have here, then, is a reflection on the transitory nature of glory and fame in a Christian context. You may be familiar with that old saying, you can't take it with you. In other words, no matter how much you have, no matter how much you earn and amass in your life, it doesn't matter because everyone ends in the same place, the grave. Worms will eat your desiccated corpse and you'll be forgotten by all men. Even Shield Chieftain, whose song is being sung in this epic poem, will one day be forgotten. The sun on this earth will burn out. All humanity will end, even if we last until the heat death of the universe. It doesn't matter. Who he was as a person and all the glory that he amassed that made him who he is are all forgotten. No one knows for certain who salvaged that load. Everything that he accumulated is just lost on the ocean. Who knows where it went or who retrieved or picked up all that glorious spoil and splendor. His life ends not in glory, but in ambiguity and futility. Thus, everything that he seemed to have done is rendered farcical as a result of the fact that death is the end and life is meaningless, even the glory that we achieve. So there's this deep lamentation inside the work about the transitory nature of glory and how people in this culture actually achieve worth and value, how they declare themselves to be of value. That is put at odds with, in juxtaposition with, to the value that is granted to people by the everlasting eternal Christian God and the hope that is afforded to people by way of the grace and mercy that he offers to them. That there is meaning to life in the fact that our death is not the end. That's the only way that life could possibly be meaningful. Death renders life a farce. It renders everything that we try to accomplish farcical and meaningless because it will be forgotten and have no lasting impact. But in this Christian worldview that's superimposed or superseding this pagan one, suddenly things can have value because it doesn't matter what you accumulate in life. What matters is not the treasures that you store up and the glory that you earn in this life, but the treasures that you store up for yourself that are lasting and eternal, where rust and moths cannot decay or destroy. The treasures that are stored up in that Christian heaven that are counted by God. And we see that in the farce that is this conclusion, this ambiguity or the uncertainty as to some random person salvaging all the hoard of glory that he spent his life accumulating, or that Shield Chieftain spent his life accumulating, even as he died in his prime because there was still strength left in him. So just from the first 50 lines, we have a complex series of ambiguous commentaries about the nature of glory and its definitional quality with respect to human life. You have an essay's worth of material just in those 50 lines. And we determine that by looking at imagery in terms of the resplendent glories that are stored up for him, or the resplendent treasures, symbolism in terms of the treasures themselves representing being a physical instantiation of his glory, the characterization of Shield Chieftain, and the glory that he's won and how he has won people over to his cause using those treasures that he's amassed. He spent them wisely, but in the end it avails him not, because death comes for us all. Looking at these literary devices through this process of close reading has given us an understanding of the text. We then see, as we go on, the continuation of this great tension between fortune and individual will on one hand, where everything is just chance, and if we are strong enough and wise enough, powerful enough, we can wrest our victory and our glory and our identity from chance and from the world. And the providence of God, the elected will of God, carrying all things together for good for those who serve him and for those who love him. So, as we go on, we have the birth of Hrothgar, who is the king of Heorot that we see a little bit later on. The fortunes of war favored Hrothgar. Friends and kinsmen flocked to his ranks, young followers, a force that grew to be a mighty army. So his mind turned to hall building. He handed down orders for men to work on a great mead hall meant to be a wonder of the world forever. So Hrothgar uses his power to create civilization. He is going to build a physical representation of the community that is being developed because of gift-giving, reciprocity, and kinship. Those bonds of kinship, the trust between people that is forged by allowing people entrance into the community and exchanging gifts, ultimately lead to the creation of this bastion of civilization. We see here at the outset that the fortunes of war favored Hrothgar. The fortunes of war. Fortune doesn't have an intent. Fortune is blind and pitiless. It's chance, not will. It's just random happenstance, fortune. However, he dispenses his God-given goods to the young and old. So we see again that tension between the pagan belief in many random deities and fortune, also individual will and the ability of the strong to impose themselves on the world, and the providential will of the Christian God. We don't know yet, perhaps, which of those two is going to come to the forefront and be ultimately validated by the text. So he gathers people together into this new community and expands outwards. He sends these orders far and wide. I have heard orders for work to adorn that wallstead were sent to many peoples, and soon it stood there, finished and ready. So many peoples are being gathered together under one banner. He is amassing a community. And how is he doing that? That mead hall that represents their community stood there, finished and ready in full view, the hall of halls, the greatest of all halls. Heorot was its name. He had settled on it, whose utterance was law. Nor did he renege, but doled out rings and torques at the table. So that doling out of gifts and rewards is ultimately at the center of Heorot and the center of civilization. The hall towered, its gables wide and high and awaiting a barbarous burning. That doom abided. But in time it would come, the killer instinct unleashed among in-laws, the bloodlust rampant. In its glory, right after it's been created, it's just waiting to be destroyed. So again we see that melancholic reflection that we noted in Shield Chieftain. Everything glorious, everything good, everything powerful and resplendent and beautiful, all the civilizations that we construct through effort and toil, that we build as a community together in order to foster our communities and allow them to grow, all of it is utterly meaningless because it's only waiting to be destroyed. It's only waiting for the torch that will set it ablaze, the grave that will cover it over and bury it, and the worm that will eat and consume. That doom abided, that barbarous burning waited, but in time it would come. And what is that destruction? What threatens to overcome and obliterate this civilization? It's the killer instinct unleashed among in-laws, the bloodlust rampant. So inside this civilization is the threat itself. The threat that's going to overturn this civilization is the bloodlust, the killer instinct, the desires inside the people within it, inside the citizens of this mead hall and the surrounding community that have been brought together. Those things, that lust for power, the bloodlust between family members, between in laws, the kin that have been forged like shield chiefs and brought into a community, that's what's going to destroy them. We're introduced then to Grendel, but we already know, we've already been told, it's not Grendel that's going to destroy them, at least not the physical Grendel. Grendel's appearance then as the monster in this text is going to become important in our analysis of the destruction of this civilization, or, well, the inevitable destruction of this civilization and all civilizations. In our interactive class, we'll continue our conversation about Beowulf and the monster that he has to kill, Grendel. And we'll also ask the question whether he is ever actually successful in killing this monster.